Okay, welcome to the Illumyx CultureCast. I'm excited to be here with you guys again today. So those of you who it's your first time on the Illumyx CultureCast, what we do is we bring in experts in the area of leadership, team development, and culture change to share with you their knowledge. Not only as a selfish person, I want to learn as well, but to help you as professionals in the community to learn and grow. Quick heads up on the show today. It's going to be pretty interactive, and it's going to be a dialogue between me and Konrad. So if you scroll to the bottom of the bar, there's a box that says Q&A. So as questions arise, I'd recommend you clicking that button and enter your question into that box, and we're going to answer questions as we go throughout the show. So in shows past, we've just done Q&A the last 5 to 10 minutes, and it felt a little rushed, so we prefer to answer questions as we go today. So I want to introduce our expert guest today, Konrad Hajdukiewicz.
Hajdukiewicz, yeah, good, Steve.
Okay, so he's an Agile coach and trainer with a company called Centare. They're based out of Milwaukee, Madison, Chicago, and I've absolutely loved my time collaborating and working with Konrad. The 3 traits that I would say describe him are an idealist, he's authentic beyond belief, and he's collaborative. So always wants to kind of figure things out in a collaborative way. And I hope that gets exemplified in our time, in our session today. So Konrad, I'm going to pass you the mic. Our session's called Becoming Agile, and you are an Agile expert. So how about you start by giving us a little bit of background? Who are you? Where do you come from? How did you get to this point here and now?
Awesome. Thank you, Steve. Thanks for the brief introduction. I'm really happy to join you in this discussion. I'm happy to always share the knowledge, spread the wealth. So I started my journey a while ago. I'm going to date myself every single time I present. There are slides of how many years plus. It used to be 10 plus, 15 plus. Now I had to change my to 20 plus years in the industry, in the IT. I started in software development. Systems, networking, network engineering, security, so all sorts of that in technology in general. And after 3 years of being employed in the corporate world, I decided to take it on my own and was independently employed for about 15 years. During that time, had plenty of opportunities of actually do work in organizations, and every single offer that I was getting, I was declining. And it was so funny because I didn't know why. It almost felt like I'm allergic to corporate world. Along the way in that corporate world, because I was obviously as a consultant, I was involved in it. I had a long-term project engagement with a large company around here, and they decided to try something new, and that something new was the funny thing called Scrum. They heard about it. The Centare was really positioned in the Midwest as the premier training facility and coaching to help organizations actually start on that path. That was before we knew about Agile. Right now almost everybody, at least in our industry, has heard of this. A lot of people are trying on their own. Some are actually investing and doing more. So I discovered that through by accident, but right away it was very fulfilling in the way people get organized together around work and how that looks. So I realized at that point I wasn't allergic to corporations, and was just really looking for that awesome way for people to come together and collaborate and solve problems in a much more meaningful way than in a traditional sense. So that was my start. After I finished the project, I decided to hang up my IT company and ended up taking a job with Centare, became trainer, coach, and rest is a history. And this is actually a lot of knowledge, a lot of information in a short period of time. So
cool.
In case, I'm sure you guys pick up an accent that I have. I was born and raised actually in Poland and emigrated to the States in the end of high school, beginning of college. So.
Very cool, very cool. And I like that you had the IT background, because my first exposure to Agile was when we developed the technology behind Illumyx. And I was completely clueless. I was like, they kept on talking about Agile and how it was the latest and greatest. And I was like, what the hell are you guys talking about? Like, how is that a differentiator for you? And I absolutely experiencing it as a customer, going through an agile process with another company, absolutely loved it. But for those uninitiated, I was hoping, Konrad, you could explain what in the heck is agile and help us understand like the true meaning of agile. Because I probably have a warped perspective on what it actually is too. So.
Yeah, you know what, that actually is a very important question to ask and to answer. In any conversation that any of people would engage around this subject, Agile, because there's so much misunderstanding, so much buzz going on, so much a slant one way or another, rooting in what the real true meaning of it is or was, the intention of it. I think it's important to get on the path then of being able to successfully become agile, adapt agility into your organization, etc. So a little bit of history. When it all started with the folks in the software industry seeing that majority, 60+% of all features of all software was either unutilized or underutilized. Requirements were being missed, customers were being dissatisfied, the value that was promised was not delivered. So they knew that there was something needed to be done, and there was a different way of doing that work. So it started really in the 1980s. There's a famous, at least in an Agile community article, new product development game in HBR. Highly recommend looking at that and reading it. That's really roots everybody in the initial premise of what Agile was. After experimenting a lot of through different ways of organizing, people coming together, organizing themselves around work, bringing work together to them and organizing that work in a different way, they found optimal, they found a way to optimize that. They found new patterns that they've established. In early 2000s, in 2001, I believe that's when they decided to solidify it and created Agile Manifesto. Now you go back in the actual looking at, and if you have the insight and you hear and you are able to find out the actual history, they got together in a ski resort in Utah, I believe, and they were essentially voting on what we're going to call this new thing, because the new product development game, that was just an article that just kicked it off. But what are we going to call this? Maybe not fad, but at the beginning, that's probably what it was perceived as. And the candidate words were responsive. Agile obviously was one of them. Adaptive and few others. Those responsive and adaptive as candidates that the most stood out. And they actually took a vote, and for various funny reasons, actually, they came up with Agile. So what is Agile? Agile is, in a nutshell, it's a way to organize people together and work around them to be able to respond to change effectively. And the sole purpose of agility was to be able to deliver highest customer value as soon as possible, get feedback through inspection, and adapt based on that feedback. So be able to pivot as quickly and as cheaply, as economically as possible. That, in a nutshell, is what Agile really is. So Agile in itself is state of mind. It's what you become, not what you do. And there's a lot of back and forth in the community that you almost always going to hear and pick up is like, don't do, but be.
No, Konrad, I remember I was talking to a colleague of mine yesterday about those Microsoft updates that would happen in the 90s and early 2000s.
Yeah.
People are always afraid to like make the update because it would just totally mess everything up and your world would be changed for several months. Did some of this come out of that and that kind of, I would say, dysfunctional approach to product development?
Well, yeah, it really was. I mean, the main problem was how long it takes for people to wait to receive something new, and how much of that something new really hits the mark. And if you take the 60+% doesn't hit the mark and you waited for it for a year and a half, 2 years, I know projects that have gone on in the larger industries for 5+ years. Now that is way too long to be able to really respond to your customers' needs and deliver that value. So you know, in Agile space, you'll hear a lot of, you know, we're going to do the twice as much work in half the time. We will have all the side benefits, which have become kind of primary goals for a lot of organizations, or the reason to adopt Agile. But stepping back, it's really as simple as, let's give customer what they need, what they want. And in order to do that, we have to deliver something frequently and respond to their feedback, and that's it. So many Agile frameworks have developed, Scrum being the most popular. Over 80% of adoptions are Scrum. There are others in that's actually seeded this before, Extreme Programming, Kanban is one of the Agile frameworks, et cetera, et cetera.
So question for you. So, I mean, this came out of the software development community, but how do you see other organizations adopting it, and like what would be some of the reasons for it? Like, is it just for product development, or is it for other things?
So as far as software, that's where it started. So it's not, currently it's not only done for software. Actually, people have experimented so much right now that Jeff Sutherland, one of the co-creators of Scrum, the other one was Ken Schwaber. He wrote a book, Scrum, and it's about delivering software in the 30 days or less. And he says software, but he gives an example beyond software. He talks about using Scrum or any iterative way in home remodeling, and he goes through an extensive example on how that could work and why it's good, why it's beneficial. You know, so if you think about it, what Agile is, it's a way of people to come together, form cross-functional teams, solve problems collectively, if you will, and organize work in a way that it's divided in such way that they can do that effectively. So the example of the home remodeling was, how can we get plumber and electrician and other specialties together and start talking? So when they actually thinking about installing the things in the house that they normally do, when they talk to each other frequently, when they plan a little bit, execute and see how it works out, and then plan some more, execute and see how this builds out, slice on top of a slice, you find out that you have a far fewer rework needs, far fewer areas where if they work alone in a silo, they actually come and to essentially disagreement with, you know, what should go where, and, you know, doesn't happen, maybe not often that we see, but in their profession does. So he really highlights that way. There's a company called Wikispeed. It's an organization. It's a global organization. They've been developing a car in a week increments. So think of building a modular car that actually drives, gets 100 miles to a gallon. It's street legal, and they iterate on it every week. There are countless examples beyond the actual software. Yeah.
Interesting. So is that a key component of Agile? Like, it's an iterative process. You're checking in daily, weekly, and problem solving on a regular basis. So you're not going off and developing the solution for 3 months and then coming back and finding out, well, that's not what we even want or need.
Yes, most definitely. I would say, I mentioned already a couple of frameworks, and you can look at all the prescription on what to follow in order to start on the path of agility. But even if you don't do any of this prescribed way, in a nutshell, if you are able to deliver a piece of work, value that your customer or client sees as valuable slice early and often, and iterate on that by responding to their feedback, then you are agile. There are organizations out there that have created their own ways, their own methods by experimenting over the years. So Scrum, Kanban, those are easy way to start with. They've been proven, and there's a lot of resource out there to utilize in order to help you with that. But you don't have to, as long as you follow this really key component of delivering value early and often, responding to that feedback, then you are increasing the level of agility.
Okay, cool. We get a couple of questions from our attendees. So first one here is how big or how large does an organization need to be in order to benefit from Agile?
How large?
Yeah, how large?
Size really does not matter. However funny that sounds, I just realized. You can benefit from Agile adoption in no matter what size of organization you are in, and the approach may be different. The difficulty obviously may be different. I work with on the whole spectrum. I actually enjoy very much working with startups that are just getting going, or startups that moving from a small to mid-size when they're out of this kind of garage mode and hodgepodge of everything, which if you really observe startups and small organizations, they're agile by necessity. They cross-collaborate by necessity. Their resources that they have or don't have force them to work in somewhat agile way. As they establish themselves, they get investors, they grow, they start looking for some ways of bringing in structure into organization. And traditionally, they will go on the path of traditional structures, which are not necessarily conducive to high level of agility. They're more of a for compliance and for internal efficiencies and et cetera, whereas agile ways are more looking at customer centricity and the highest value to customer first and responding to that change. So I love getting involved with the startups because that's helping and putting them on a path when they don't have to transition afterwards. What I find out in the large organizations, the difficulty is that they have established so many processes. They have very large structures put in place, and structures, not necessarily hierarchies, although that is a big piece too, but structure around projects, structure around funding, the accounting, HR, all the functions within an organization. That builds a big structure that it's much more challenging to move while you adapting agility and you transitioning into that new way of thinking, new way of organizing.
So, so a smaller company might actually be easier to work with.
Yes,
in some ways.
It is because I think naturally they already are. You just have to help them to remain that way, and then provide some structure that they can follow, but not move away from this agility that they innately have from the get-go.
Yeah, and Illumyx is a startup, and a quick example. So we're launching a beta program. So we have a behavioral inventory to understand the culture of a company, and then there's things that come out of there that are natural opportunities to make improvements on. So we're testing out some agile process to train companies into, like, for example, take decision making and what's working or not working with that process. Let's take a small chunk of that, develop some solutions, test it out, get some feedback, so they don't develop this whole new program that's a waste of time. But it's very, like you said, responsive, collaborative, feedback oriented, so you can really develop something that's going to work for people. So
absolutely.
Yeah. Cool. I got another question for you. So Dan asks, I can imagine dozens of applications for this process. What's an example of a time when an agile process would not be a good fit?
Awesome question. I get that all the time in training because people want to see if this is a silver bullet solution for everything. Do we plug it in and all and then expect all the great results? The answer is no. It is kind of overlaps a little bit with the previous question as far as size of organization. I would engage in the size of organization before where the agile fits. In this case, for this question, I would say that the way you evaluate whether agile method is appropriate is by the type of problem that you're solving. What I mean by that is what space does the problem live in? And by space, I mean, is it a simple, complicated, complex? The fourth quadrant would be chaotic, which from chaos, the only way to get any grasp on chaos is to bring it back into complex space. What defines these spaces is of how much do we know as far as how many knowns there are versus unknowns when in respect of the requirements or the what it is that we're solving, and then how much do we know on how to solve this, or versus how much we don't know. And in general, in the product development space, and it doesn't have to be software, although software is a big component of a lot of products nowadays. Most product development is creative work where there are way more unknowns than knowns. So a way of iterating on developing that product and getting frequent feedback is the really most effective way to be able to deliver something that the customer really wants. Where Agile is maybe not doesn't work, but it's not necessary, and it's something that that falls more into simple space. When everything is known upfront, all the inputs, the outputs are predictable, and you can essentially get a lot of efficiency out of that system by automation. Good examples of that is anything that requires repetitive steps of assembly, that type of production. The agile methods like Scrum would be a tremendous overhead for that and unnecessary. Majority of a simple problem space solutions are easily automated, either automated so human beings can be put in a way that they most efficiently deliver that outcome, or we can remove us people and truly automate it with robotics and other ways. So if you think about outside the box, that's really what I would be looking at.
So I want to recap those three areas. I think this is really fascinating. So you said problems can be defined as simple, complex, or chaotic. Am I missing one?
Simple, complicated, complex.
Complicated, okay.
Complicated is where you have, it's kind of in between. If you really look at the agile methods, like let's go back in the waterfall, which is define process control, something that we can define up front, all the inputs. And when we apply the same procedure, same process, the outputs are always going to be identical. That's a simple problem space. Complicated is when we start getting into more type of, if you take it, organizations, IT organizations, support ticket systems, any operations type environments, infrastructure, and I apologize for maybe not having other examples. That is kind of my life for 15 years, so I'm really close to that one. But those have fairly repeatable steps that you apply to solve those problems. Think of a support ticket that comes into a system. You have to triage that. You have to figure out root cause, and then you apply some repeatable steps to resolving it. Within those steps, there's some variance. There are some unknowns, but it follows a fairly similar pattern. That would be complicated space. In that space, even Scrum may not be the best approach. Kanban really well, which is a pull system, comes from a Toyota production system, very much lean manufacturing concepts. And Kanban, which they implemented as a Kanban in Japanese means signal or signaling system. It's essentially signals when there's a problem in the flow of the work. So we optimize for the flow. It's relatively straightforward. Some folks actually argue that it's even more agile than working on Scrum. It's got less boundaries. Now, when you get to a problem space, when you have so many unknowns, like think of any new product, any creative type things where you don't know what technology you're going to use. You don't know how the technology is going to be used. You don't even know the requirements, how they're going to evolve. The only way to do that is to put something working in front of your customers and get that feedback. So
interesting.
A couple of things of note for people that are listening and maybe taking notes. Canavan framework, it really describes in detail this those four problem spaces and different applications of solutions for those. And Canavan is a Welsh word, so it does not spell anywhere near what it sounds like. If I'm not mistaken, the spelling is CY. No, hang on. I'm gonna write it on the board. Canefin. CANEFYN. I'm probably butchering it, but that may be close to it. That one, and Ralph Stacey did research back in the day, and speaks very much into this in the same problem space. You can, if you look at Ralph Stacey diagram, if you Google it, it'll pop in and you can dive deeper into that subject if that's of interest to you.
Yeah, and we can dig in and find some links and send it on to you guys, anyone listening, over the next 24, 48 hours as well, just to make that search easier for you. So another question for you. So what are some of the challenges of implementing an agile work environment?
Oh, yes. Great. There are many challenges. Before I dive into some specifics, I think there are many challenges is because it's, and this is my opinion based on the experience being in this space. For so long, we've been working in a particular way. So we've, most people have decades, if they don't want to be dated that much, maybe not decades, but a significant amount of time where certain habits are established, structures are put in place in an organization to reinforce those processes that are put in for efficiency and internal optimization and compliance, et cetera. And it is very hard to break because Agile is essentially reprogramming your mind. If you're thinking, let's become Agile, and Agile is state of being, that means we have to approach this with a different mindset. Very frequently in the classes that I teach, and we have experiential learning in those classes, people actually come to this conclusion on their own. It's like a light bulb moment that comes on. And it's frequently described as, I have to break down my current mental model and rebuild it from scratch. Mm. So if you think about that, when you ask people to do that, that's a big challenge, especially for people that have been seasoned and been building this mental model to do well, with their job, with what their passion is. So now we're telling them is, okay, for everything that you learn, forget it. Just recently, I was a lady came. And she's been in the project management space I think she's at 40 years, PMP, PMI certified, with all the PMP certifications, et cetera. And she asked me, can you give me a quick overview of the terminology and how they map in Agile, how they map to what I know? And, my heart breaks every time I have to say that, but I said, Lori, all the stuff that you learned, the best way to actually grasp an Agile and be successful in that one, forget that. And as much as that hurts, because you've invested your entire life, your career.
How did you respond to that?
Path. Well, first of all, I think for her it was a shock, because it was really meant to be really kind of shaking. I'm looking at it as like, let's grab somebody, shake them out of the maybe a current mode and put them in a different mode. Because when you're stuck in the translation, when you're stuck in translation, that's when you suffer the most. I really equate that to learning a foreign language, being English being my second language. My experience was when I first came to the United States, I was translating all the time from Polish to English. Now I have to do it in reverse. But what was really hard, the translation, you have only so much capacity to do it, and not everything translates directly. Actually, when it comes to Agile, most things do not translate directly. So you cannot slap a new term on an old way of thinking, of doing things. You have to reprogram yourself so you think in that new language. And for me, that's clear, because I've gone on that path. Anybody that is bilingual or multilingual, you probably can relate. But that would be closest analogy that I would have. So what are the things, the challenging? I mean, you got to have since it's a structural. That's a big box to unpack in a short time. It is.
Well,
I'm trying to think how to succinctly put it together, and I'm struggling to find a way. So
well, mindset's a big deal, and I mean one of the things we talked about in a previous show in the anatomy of teamwork is how important structure is to creating autonomy for decision making and
yes,
for teams. So maybe you can talk about the challenges of creating structure around.
Thank you. That actually dovetails quite well. I was on a different train of thought on that one. It's actually very apropos. You're talking about this as CultureCast. I'm going to make a statement that you might have heard before, or maybe some of your listeners have heard. If not, think about it real deep and really take it to heart, because I see it everywhere in life where this unfolds. Culture follows structure. And what I mean by that is, what is culture? Culture is a set of values, behaviors, and everything that we bring together and then we share with a particular group of people. And in order for those behaviors to be, and the values to be almost given by default, almost where you don't think about it, you just behave a certain way, it is the structure that enforces that, or reinforces that, or establishes that when you're first building, having those building blocks. So if we're talking about Agile being different mindset, which does bring in different set of Agile values, we do ask people to behave in very different way. In a nutshell, we asking them to transform their culture. That is one of the hardest, if you've ever tried any cultural transformation, is one of the hardest things to accomplish.
It's pretty difficult.
Yes, unless you remember this phrase, that culture follows structure. So I got this from it was a very good training I was in several times with one of the creators of LESS, which is large scale Scrum. It's actually how to simplify organizations to be able to scale agility within it and realize all the benefits. Craig Larman is one of the two. And he is fantastic in the way he describes this. In any way that you're trying to shape people's behavior or change the way they organize around certain things, the way work gets organized, is if you affect the structure within an organization, the behavior will follow. I started looking at this in all my training, all my coaching and advising in organizations, and applying this, and got outside of that in the real life. I actually see this happening everywhere. It's just you can almost create it to be being a law. If I'm not mistaken, maybe Larman even did. Structure. What I mean by structure, whenever people think of a structure in an organization, everybody, not everybody, but a lot of people, or most people, when I ask them, gravitate towards hierarchy, right? Your structure of power, or I guess, or how people are organized around the organizational structure. That is something that is that can be adjusted, can be challenged if you want to change the behavior. So if you're looking at what happens in the flat organization, if you're trying to have teams that are empowered and self-organized, and maybe even self-managed, like some organizations have done, having a heavy hierarchy may be against that. So if you're asking to people behave in a way that is flat, and they have a heavy big ladder, only the selected few that are willing to push the envelope will going to be able to actually behave that way, and it's usually not sustainable. I pick on the hierarchy because that's the first one that comes to mind. But even more important, is how the work is structured. So product versus projects. I'm not sure if you've heard that before. Most of us think of projects. Projects are temporary. Projects are short initiatives that have a start and an end date, that are relatively small, optimized in a way that they touch in specific areas, and they really do not typically do not unbox and look at how they affect the entire system. So when you're looking at the product structure, product is much broader and much bigger in an organization. We can think of projects as initiatives to enhance that product, or build out, or fix, or what have you. That is much bigger picture thinking. And in one thing that kind of structure change allows to do, or helps people to behave right away, to start looking at the system as a whole, as opposed to looking at subsystems and the small pieces within it. It's another big component of how you can, or how you need to really look at in the big picture in an organization in order to realize the higher level of agility. So yeah, I'm sorry. I know I'm unpacking a lot. I'm unpacking a big box, probably with advanced terms, but that's where my mind always goes to. So structures, how we fund projects. So just briefly, you want to list them. How we fund projects, how we staff people, how we hire people. So HR, finance department, or accounting. All of that is really affected in an organization in some way, shape, or form. So when people are looking at how can I bring agility in my organization, how can I adapt that, you gotta realize that you're buying into. That's actually one of my bullet points talking about a buy-in. It's not about just getting a buy-in, but knowing what you're buying into. And you're buying into a holistic approach.
Yeah, I remember when I went through the process, it was I was amazed at there's specific roles on the team. So one guy was doing database, another guy was doing UI, and there was overlap, but each week they had about 5 or 8 different projects they had to complete.
Yeah.
And then we check in every morning. So there's a cadence to how frequently you meet, what those meetings are about. Some are just check-ins, some are longer, more kind of deeper dives into what was accomplished. And each person kind of had their specialty, which was kind of interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So is that an example of some of the structure too?
So absolutely. So one of the key ingredients of making this work from ground up is forming cross-functional teams. So in other words, specialization goes against agility, or is the opposite of agility. If you're specializing, and that could be skill set specialization, that could be domain knowledge specialization, or a functional within organizations, or even in the product of functional specialization. What that creates a silos of knowledge that and work that need to be at some point brought together and integrated. Very seldom when you're talking about delivering highest value first, if you divide work that way, if you create that kind of structure, very seldom you have priorities across those different silos that align to a bigger picture, that when pieces come to integrate at the end or after a while, that they're actually already in the same priority. Because each area may be working at different pace because of the nature of their work. Maybe the challenge of the work is different. Maybe prioritization within each area is different because we may not be synchronizing and communicating. So this is normally
one of the keys to success then. So generalization versus specialization with the team members.
So I'll be careful with generalization, because when you're using that word, at least when you say generalization, a lot of people think of jack of all trades, master of none.
Yep.
So, and that's not at all what we would be looking for in the community. And maybe you've heard of this. Some folks referring to as T-shape people, or have a T-shape skills. V-shape that comes from how you draw the actual depth and a breadth of different skill set or different knowledge for people, and that forms a T or a letter V. In other words, without picturing anything, it's really generalizing specialists. The concept behind it is that you do have a specialty, but that's not the only thing that you can bring into the table. So besides a depth in one area that you want to continue growing, you also have a breadth of other areas of skills or other knowledge that you bring to the table, and you're growing those as well. Those aren't as deep as your primary one, but if you create a cross-functional team and you have a diversity with those with the depth and the breadth, you can have a pretty decent overlap that as a team as a unit. If you look at team as an entity, no longer individual, because that's another component, structural component, is that the team can deliver pretty much on anything at that point. Now, from a get-go, you probably don't get that. You really have to seed this, you have to invest in it, and then you have to nurture that approach.
Well, I'm excited just hearing that, because I just made a few new hires. I got a chief behavioral scientist who's PhD in organizational systems, but he's got a background in marketing and sales.
Yes.
VP of sales who deep domain in sales, but experience with strategy, and she was a CEO previously, so she's got a lot of experience leading companies. And then I got a product dev guy who's got a deep marketing background as well. So I'm like, As
You
you're
got
talking, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm set up. I mean,
You got it. No, you really got it. You know, I open up most of my classes, most of my Scrum classes actually with sitting in the circle, introducing ourselves, and we're talking about cross-functional team. And I ask a question: is like who in this group thinks of themselves as they know only one thing that they can do well? And nobody raises hand because none of us are, 100% specializing in one thing. Based on our hobbies, based on our interests, based on our previous experiences, we all have a breadth of knowledge. We just not necessarily, in organizations, we are not structured to take advantage of that because we are going for local optimization and efficiency, which, like I said, in a simple problem space, in a manufacturing or assembly line, this is really good thing to go for. You can really gain those efficiencies because you crank out those widgets. But in the product development and a creative knowledge workspace, that's not at all what's going to be successful.
Cool. Well, Konrad, we only have a couple minutes left. What do you think are some key takeaways or key things people need to be aware of as they're looking to implement Agile?
Yes, absolutely. Let me list a few of those things for you. So in order for having successful and lasting Agile experience, whether you're adapting it, whether you're building it from scratch, or going to go with something that's been proven, like the existing frameworks, you have to have strong executive leadership buy-in. And not only buy-in, but they have to have a good understanding what they're buying into, which means not only the benefits of that, because that's usually where it's, okay, what are you going to get from it, but what it takes to really go for it and transform, if you will. Solid training. I see way too many folks going and trying it alone, and us, a small process change here and there where you have to retrain, that may be very good. With this kind of big undertaking, because the nature of this beast, how big it is and how challenging it is, having a foundation, a solid training foundation, and I don't mean any training. You really has to be done by professionals that right now, with the market being so huge, you don't always know what you're going to get up front. So if you're shopping, if you're looking for that, if you're thinking about it, if you're going to shop for it, you definitely want to do your due diligence and get reputable places.
Are there certain certifications in the industry that people can look for, or is it kind of like you got to?
Yes, there are. There are certifications, although with any certifications, you have folks that are looking at those more with more weight or with less weight. What's the paper worth? All depending on a certifying body too. So I would be, I always try to be cautious with that and look at all your sources. Look at the reputation of that body. When it comes to Scrum, the Scrum.org, which there's a professional Scrum certifications. I'm biased towards that. I favor that more over the Scrum Alliance for historical reasons. It was just looking at the quality of what they delivered in the past. Although, to be fair and to be honest, you can find great trainers and training bodies on both sides of the spectrum, and you can find not so good ones on both sides as well. And other things. So solid training is one of those things that's actually sets you off as a baseline. And in the training, you're going to get a lot of things that what can be the ideal state. You're going to get involved in an organization undertakes this effort. There's a lot of what can we do in the current state as we transitioning. So if you look at training, maybe more idealistic, maybe dogmatic, what should then happen is you should follow that with a capable coaching.
Okay.
Coaching is a critical aspect of it. We over the years, we developed this model that we don't train without coaching, we don't coach without training. And every single time when we tried, the client did not get the value that they expected. So, it's just empirically, we see that as a recipe for success. And the capable coaching, once again, there are so many coaches that especially right now, after years of this being in workplace, where folks after a couple of years, they been on a Scrum Master team and I'm going to go independent, I'm going to start coaching. they might not necessarily have that much experience. Coaching is very complex and covers a lot of different aspects. We could probably do a whole webinar on what really agile coaching means and what you could look for in agile coach. But capable coaching will get you from your current state and start helping you march forward into this, closer getting to the state that you get probably in that baseline training.
Yeah, I like that, because it's not a light switch, especially if this involves culture change. It's going to take some time. So that
Exactly.
is really important. So we're going to wrap for today, but before we do, you have a special offer for those who've attended. I want you to talk about that, and then we'll send more information out on it in a couple of days.
Yes. So my goal is always to spread the knowledge, help folks get started, or if they stalled, get going. And the more people get exposed to this awesomeness that I found, I think the better. So whenever I have opportunity to speak like this one, I try to get people an option to reach out for a further discussion, maybe looking at some observations, some short coaching session. So to all the participants on this webinar, I'd like to offer the same. I would like to extend that offer. Steve and I were looking at on how to best provide you that with. I don't have anything set up for scheduling, but if you are interested, maybe even just continuing this conversation, maybe you have questions that within a short period of time we can't answer. I can talk about this forever. I love this topic. I love, like I said, spreading it so you can know more. If you reach out to me on LinkedIn, mention that you were a participant in this webinar. I'd love to get to know you and continue sharing my knowledge and even learning from each other, because you can feel free to disagree with me, and from every good debate we can learn more as well.
Cool. And I would strongly encourage you to reach out to Konrad. I've had many conversations with him. He's a wealth of knowledge, and he's just a fun guy to talk with. So Konrad, thanks for being on the show this month. Just a heads up for next month, we will be having another CultureCast. I'm going to be introducing you to our Chief Behavioral Scientist, Drew Fleck, and Dan Ritter, who are going to be talking about our beta program. We have a new innovative way to drive culture change that we want to introduce you to you guys. And that'll be that. So looking forward to seeing you guys next time. And once again, thank you for being with us today, Konrad.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you guys for listening.
All right, take care.
Bye now.